Welcome to this week's episode of the Book Salad Podcast. I am Hannah Caitlin, and I am here with my co-host Stephanie Mack, and we have the ultimate honor of chatting with one of our favorite authors of all time, Miss Katherine Center. We are just so excited to have you on this episode. And if you guys don't know who Katherine Center is, she is the author of 11 novels, multiple New York Times bestsellers of loved novels like The Bodyguard, The Lost Husband, and most recently, my personal favorite, The ROMCOMers. So, Katherine, we are just elated, honored, blessed, all the words, all the things to have you here with us today. This is like a bucket list. I think I say this on a lot of episodes lately, but this is just literally a bucket list episode for us. So we are super thankful to have you here chatting with us about all things books.
We sure are.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for thinking of me.
Yes, we had Bookcase Beauty, the Bookstagrammer, on one of our earlier episodes. I know you guys know and love each other, Katherine. And I said to her live on the episode, you came up and how much we love your books. And I was like, I wonder if she would ever come on the podcast. And she said, I bet she would. And that's when I said, we're going to manifest this and it's going to happen. So she's a doll and a really fun connection. She's just, one of the good ones.
And she's having a baby. I'm so excited for her. So happy for her. So, if you're listening, we're all so excited. Honorary aunts over here.
Yes. Oh my goodness. And I discovered you with How to Walk Away. That's when I first read you in 2018. And that's when I had my third baby and was reading a ton on my Kindle. And it just was recommended to me on my Kindle. I read it in probably a day and a half, and it blew me away. It captured my soul. I was like, I have to read everything this woman ever writes. And in my opinion, I read a lot of books. I think that you nail the women's fiction rom-com crossover novel better than anyone else in the game. And I really mean that. I think that it's a gift to be able to read a book that is truly that feel of the old school rom-com, but it has the heft to it and you balance it so well. So well done. I've read every book since and your backlist, and it's a real honor to have you today. Of course.
What I'm always trying to do really is find that balance, because I do think of them as sort of like half women's fiction, half love story. Right.
Right.
And I want both. I want the personal growth and the struggle and the wisdom and the poetry of women's fiction. Like I need that to feel satisfied with the story. I want the depth and the, gravitas, but I also really, really, really want somebody to take their shirt off. Like I really
give us the heat. The heat and the wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah. I want the joy of it and the play and the banter. The excitement and feeling of having something good to look forward to.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to do both, like as much as I can.
Yeah. I remember when I started reading your novels, now I underline a bit more in fiction because I'm studying the craft, but you were the first one I started underlining in sort of a nonfiction way in a fiction book, because I was like, this sounds like something Brene Brown would say, like just the wisdom. So it's just a lot of fun. Things you see when it fires, so many good ones. So yeah, I love it. You do it so well.
Thank you. I do feel like at this point I've been writing for so long. Like my first book came out in 2007. So I feel like the great grandma of rom-coms at this point. And I have this feeling like, all right, I've lived my life. I've learned some things, and I definitely try to work that kind of stuff into the stories because I think we all need a little help. I'm always looking for wise thoughts to sort of help me my stuff. So yeah. If I feel like I've figured out anything smart about life, I definitely try to work.
I think it reads true in your novels. So we would love to know about the rom-comers. That kind of leads us into that very favorite. I know it has been so well received and so loved. Everybody I've talked to has just raved about it. So tell us all about the rom-comers in your own amazing, beautiful words.
Well, okay, so it is a romantic comedy about two screenwriters who have to write a romantic comedy together. So it's a rom-com about writing a rom-com, basically. And It is my
So good.
favorite book that I have ever written. I feel like it is the book that I was put on this earth to write for us all. You know, it's my first time that I've ever given myself permission to write about writers. I always had to write about people with real jobs. And so it was actually really, really fun for me to write about writers, which are, you know, it's a particular kind of breed of person, and definitely write some comedy. And I certainly have a lot of insights about writers after being one for all these years. So that was fun. And, you know, to me, it's like the perfect blend of like heartrending and super fun and swoony and just so full of banter and tension and sort of this rising feeling of anticipation as these two people who do not like each other at the start have to figure out a way to work together because she needs him and he needs her. And it turns out to be just, I don't know, for me, it's like clearly my own target audience because it is my own personal comfort read. Like if somebody is in the grocery store, I will go home and just read a couple chapters of the rom-com just to kind of like reestablish my equilibrium, like just for a little oxytocin, just for a little like joy. Like it is, it's just, I don't know. I mean, I always tell writers you should write the story that you would like to read. You know, whenever anybody's asking for advice, I'm like, you can't write the story that you think your high school English teacher would want you to write. Like, what would Faulkner want me to write? Right? Write the story that your inner reader, if you had a free Saturday and a fuzzy blanket and a hot cup of tea, the story that your inner reader would love to read. And for me, I think that is exactly what this story is. It's all the things that I love in a story. So I'm really excited about it.
It's so special. How much did you already know about screenwriting specifically? Did you have to do a lot of research in that realm?
A few things, because when I was first starting out way back in the day, I had a friend who wrote for television in LA. And so I was trying to figure out, like, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I knew I wanted to write some kind of fictional stories of some kind. But I wasn't sure exactly how to make that happen. It all felt kind of overwhelming. And I had this friend who was like, you should come to LA. You can make a great living as a screenwriter writing for TV in LA. And so I had about a year and a half where I was really kind of working on trying to do that. And I read a ton of screenplay writing books. I wrote some spec screenplays. I placed contests, and I was kind of shifting my life in this direction, thinking that I might go and write for TV. But then I wound up getting married, and it occurred to me that we probably might have some kids at some point. And when I really started thinking about that, I decided that I kind of wanted to set down my roots in my hometown in Houston, Texas, which is where I live. And so writing novels actually seemed like a little bit better at that moment in my life because I wouldn't have to move to LA, which I'm sure would have had many upsides, but I just wanted to stay close to my mom and my sisters. And so anyway, I was in Texas and I wrote novels. So I've written screenplays basically, and I've read a million screenplays, and I know that you can download them for free off the internet. So if there's ever a movie that you love, you can go find it on the internet and read it.
I didn't know that. I love knowing that.
They're all out there and they're free. If you want to read When Harry Met Sally, you can go download it for free off the internet and just read it. So that was part of it. And then the other half of that question is that 2 of my books have now been made into movies.
Yes.
I know it was the same screenwriter director who adapted both of them. And she is also from Houston and we're buddies. So I learned a lot about the process when the movies were happening. They kind of took me to the set and I got to be an extra in the movies.
So fun.
So I would not say that I'm like a true insider in the like world, but I still peek behind a couple of curtains.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So in a way, this book did not require as much research as usual because I already knew a lot about the writing life and what it's like to be a writer. But I did call my friend in LA who's still writing for television and has wrote for all these big shows. Yeah. And I kind of interviewed her about like, what are the nuts and bolts of like how you get it done? And then also my friend Vicky White, who's the director and screenwriter of both of the movies of both of my books. She, I took her out to lunch and we had a whole big powwow about what it's really like, what that life is really like. So yeah, some research, but not as much as usual, I would say.
Yeah, that's so neat to hear. I would also venture to guess that your start in screenwriting is a huge part of why you are the dialogue queen. You say so much with dialogue, and I took one screenwriting class in graduate school, and that was just a challenge. You're saying it all with the dialogue. You don't have the luxury of launching into a nice little paragraph of narration there. It's,
I will honestly say that dialogue is the one thing in all of the millions of things that you have to get good at to write a really good story. It is the one thing that I have never had to study. I just kind of arrived on this earth with some sort of innate sense of how to do that. But everything else, I have studied like a beast. I have ever been written on how to plot a story, how to pace a story, how to hook readers, how to craft a scene. I mean, everything else that you need to be good at, I have with, my frontal lobe, worked really hard.
Totally.
I've literally read every book on writing that has ever been written. Many of them playwriting books because they really help you with structure and pacing.
Right.
But for some reason, dialogue is just this thing. If I put the right two people in the right situation, they just start talking to each other and I hear it in my head and I type it out like I'm taking dictation. I mean, that's
what a gift.
Decided to. Yeah. I feel lucky. It's
definitely.
Yeah. That's in the game over all these years. I've really been the opposite of an overnight sensation. It's been 15 years, slowly finding the people who like the particular kind of thing that I do. And it was this love of writing dialogue, I think, that was the thing that made it impossible for me to quit. Because I kind of kept thinking, I should quit. I don't think this is working out.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad you didn't. We're so glad.
Amen. Do you have any all-time favorite craft books that you would recommend to our aspiring and working writers out there?
I love a book called The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. It's a great one. I mean, I highlighted so much in that book. There was not one page that didn't have pink highlighting in it. And I underlined things. I went back and, reread, underlining with a big black ballpoint pen. And then I marked up that book so much. I just mutilated it so badly. That I took pictures and I sent the author of that book a film letter. I was like,
I love it.
Your book, man. That book is incredible. Another one that just popped into my head is Save the Cat, which is a screenwriting book.
So good.
It's a great one. Yes. And he's adorable and he makes it all so friendly and easy. And, most screenwriting books get pretty specific about this needs to happen by this page. And I don't really follow all of that, all those prescriptions very tightly. Yep. I don't worry about any of that, but it's good to think about it. You want to have an overall sort of roller coaster structure of the story is going to be because it has to have a structure. Honestly, to grad school for creative writing, I have a master's in fiction writing, which is a totally worthless degree, by the way. And we never talked about plot. We never talked about structure. We mostly talked about details and how to craft a scene and how to work the poetry in. But the stuff that was missing in my sort of actual official studies was how do you shape it? What shape does it? And so that really is important. It needs to be a certain shape because the roller coaster structure underneath what's happening is the thing that's driving your emotions. And stories are emotion machines. I mean, you have to get people, you have to punch them in the gut and make them laugh, and you have to make people feel things. That's your number one job. Everything else is the purpose of that job. And so, so screenwriting books are great for that because they really teach you about the structure, and you need to know about the structure. You can't just wing it. It can't just be some random stuff is happening in your story. Everything that's in there needs to be there for a reason, and it needs to be taking us somewhere for some purpose in the story that is an emotional purpose. So yeah, so that's another great one. I love that book, but I also don't take it too literally. You know what I mean?
Right.
In novel writing, they actually have a whole series about novels too now.
That's
But
the
that
one I read.
original,
Yeah, I read Save the Cat Writes a Novel in January, and I loved it. I felt like this is a cheat sheet. I can't believe they're putting this out there. It's so helpful. And it was fascinating to read all of the most famous books, romantic comedies that they share in there that all loosely or tightly hit these beats, and you're like, this is what makes a great story. That it's that flow that hits you in the gut right when you need to, takes you low, brings you high, takes you low again. And it's really helpful. So
yeah, and you need to understand that if you're a writer, right? You
right.
need to understand that underlying shape, and if you don't, even if you decide to push against it, or even if you decide this doesn't need to happen right now, you need to at least know that it's there. And I think a lot of writers don't know. I think a lot of writers, even very famous, even multiple published writers, kind of wrote it on instinct, and that's fine. Trust your instincts, but you also need to know what you're doing. I mean, if you're going to do it professionally, you need to know why you're making your choices. Like I take it very seriously. It's a heart thing for me, but it's a brain thing as well.
Yeah. We would love to talk a little bit about Emma and Charlie. They're so charming.
Yes.
They're so human. They're so perfectly imperfect and compulsively readable. What did these particular characters teach you? Whether it's about your craft, yourself, their world, the genre itself. Is there anything you really took away from them? We know characters can kind of appear to us and tell us what they have to say. So we would love to know what you learned from them.
I think it was just so fun to write them. I'm trying to think if they taught me anything. I think they mostly just reminded me about things, about how much fun it is to fall in love with somebody, about how much I personally in stories love to watch the change arc that happens between people. So like Charlie, for example, Charlie starts out pretty douchey, right? He's like not the sweetest man you've ever met. When
For sure.
And a lot of people don't like that. Like I've been made aware that there are some people who are like, Charlie, and it's true. Like when he starts out, he says some terrible things to her. I mean, they're not terrible, but they're certainly self-centered. They're certainly egotistical. He's dismissive of her as a person at the beginning. But of course, that's all set up for the totally payoff later of him just like emotionally falling to his knees with mad love and appreciation for who she is. And as a character, right? So yeah, he's not great in the beginning, right? But he is going to get mowed down like a Mack truck by head over heels in love with Emma, and it's going to change him as a writer, as a person, as a guy, and like she's so awesome that she's just going to fully humble him, and I love watching that happen. Like that's one of my favorite story. And so for me, in this story, it's happening on two levels because it's happening on a personal level, right? He thinks she's kind of worthless because he's so full of himself at the start, and she's a failed screenwriter, and so he's not taking her seriously. So there's the joy of watching him come to take her seriously as a person, and then as a writer. But then on top of it, she sets out to convince him that like love is not actually a Ponzi scheme, which is what he thinks at this time. So not only does he come to love Emma, he comes to believe in love over the course of the story. It forces him to do that through sheer force of will. And I love that too, right? He's humbled on professionally, personally, and but joyfully humbled, right? Because it's like it's really good for him. This is exactly what he needed. He was closed off. He was cranky, right? He had gone through some hard things. I mean, he
really went through it.
And closed off in those ways. And also he's blocked as a writer when it starts too. And so Emma is exactly what Charlie needs. And Charlie's exactly what Emma needs. And the whole story is just about the two of them like figuring that out and opening up to it. And I love watching that change. Like two nice people meeting and falling in love nicely with each other is fine. I'll never say no to that either, right? But for me, it's so much more emotionally intense if they're clashing, if they're not sweet to each other. I mean, he says things to her in the beginning that he later comes to regret, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I make sure that there's this moment where he is regretting. Like there's a moment when he tells her that if she really took her career seriously, she never would have not taken this fellowship that she won. So she had won a fellowship to go write, go do screenwriting in LA, and she didn't wind up going. And he's like, well, obviously you don't take your career seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But then later, much later, he finds out that she had very good reasons for not going that had to do with her family and everyone's health. And that it wasn't that she didn't want to go or that she didn't care. It was that life stopped her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as he finds that out, he's just like awash with regret for being stupid, right? And so blind that she was so much more complicated and life is so much more complicated than he gave it credit for. And I love that moment. And I even love, like, especially in a love story, right? Because in a love story, you've got some guarantees. You've got a happily ever after that is guaranteed in a love story. You know these people are going to get together in the end. That's not a surprise. That's not an accident. That's not a whim of the writer where she's like, what should I do? Like, should I get them together? Like, she knows from the beginning, these people are going to get together. The whole story is about getting them there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you know that as a reader, when you open up a brightly colored cover that's got, illustrated stuff on it, it's a rom-com. So you're going to get that HEA. You are constitutionally guaranteed that HEA. And so all the terrible stuff that happens in the middle, it's going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Already. And so when I see in a rom-com or a romance, when I see like a love interest being a douchebag at the beginning, for me, it's fun. I don't find that alienating because I know he's going to get his comeuppance. And then, like, for me, it generates this fantastic feeling of anticipation for the moment when he regrets, all of his foolish. So anyway, that's a long answer, but
that's a great answer.
Yes. Yes.
And I knew already that I loved that, but it's always really fun to see it play out in the story. And I think this is the story where I've done that the best. In How to Run Away. Okay, I'm just going to keep talking.
Please, that's what we're here for.
Yes,
We want it all.
Yes.
My favorite kind of actual man in the real world is like a golden retriever kind of man. I like sweet, helpful men. I'm not like, my husband is a sweet, helpful man who's an EMT and a school teacher, and he's like a lover, not a fighter. And I'm not like an alpha hole kind of person, but the couple of times that I've tried to write stories that had, quote unquote, grumpy heroes in them, it's been hard for me because I'm like, ugh, it's just like, ugh. But with Charlie, I felt like I understood him from the very beginning. I knew that he had some stuff, and I knew that Emma was going to come along and force him to face that stuff and push past it and grow as a person. And I just could not wait to see that happen. So, all right, I've talked a lot about that.
We are back after a few technical difficulties, and Katherine Center was just going to tell us what makes a rom-com and just kind of the importance behind these stories. So, Katherine, you can take the stage once more.
Well, so here's the thing. Rom-coms are a very special genre, and I've really done a lot of reading about this and a lot of deep diving into this, but all stories are built on anticipation, right? Of this feeling that something's going to happen and us being curious about what that thing is. But with most stories, the anticipation has a lot of dread in it. It's like, like that person's going to die, that person's going to go to jail. You're worried about them. And what's so sort of special and unique about rom-coms and romance is that it's not a sense of dread that it's built on. You're not worrying in that way. You are guaranteed a happily ever after, by the genre. And what you're doing is moving towards a feeling that we're headed for something better, right? So it is a feeling of anticipation, but it's positively valenced anticipation. It's hopeful. You're looking forward to something good instead of dreading something bad. And that is a pretty unique thing amongst the genres. And it is the thing that is the reason I love love stories the best of all the kinds of stories, because I never anticipated how much adult life was going to be just saturated with worry, right? When you grow up, you are worried about everything and everyone, from your parents to your pets. And it's exhausting. And when I have a moment of free time to delve into a story, I want to jump into a story that's going to lift me up and make me laugh and make me swoon and be fun. So let me just say, I want all that good. I want the play. I want the joy. I want the banter. I want that feeling like something amazing is going to happen, right? Because that feeling of looking forward to something good, there's another word for that feeling, and it's hope.
Mm-hmm.
Hope is the word for that feeling. And so rom-coms are special and unique because they reconnect us with that feeling of hope. And it is very easy when you are surrounded by worries and concerns and a crazy world out there to lose touch with that feeling of hope. And so I think that rom-coms are not just good for us personally and nourishing personally. I think they are actually good for the world because all of us who are out there reading them are practicing and getting better at love and hope and joy, all things that the world desperately needs a lot more of. So I'm like here to stand up for the whole genre. I'm like, not take these stories seriously as a culture. We roll our eyes at them. We pick on them. We call them, predictable, not understanding that predictable happily ever after at the end of a love story is exactly what everybody showed up for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something that the writers wrote because they couldn't come up with anything better. They put it there specifically to allow their readers to access that very particular feeling of having something that matters to look forward to. And that is a gift and a blessing and a beautiful thing. And so I'm just like, here I am, right? Like a grown up adult writer. And the pandemic kind of broke me. And I was like, I'm tired of just sitting quietly by while people roll their eyes at love stories. And I've decided to start standing up for them very loudly. And that is what I'm writing author's note after author's note. I'm talking about it at book events, talking about it here. I'm like, that happily ever after exists for a very specific emotional reason in the story. And it's good for us. That said, I want to add one other thing. For me, a really good love story needs that build and that sense of anticipation and that feeling like we're moving towards like a serious kind of joy that matters. But I don't just want happy things to happen in the story. I also want that story to break my heart, like very badly. And if it doesn't, I'm disappointed. So I need a story that does both. I need a story that's overall arc is going in a positive, hopeful, joyful direction. But along the way, I want there to be tension, stress, angst. I want people to be thrown into a snake pit by pirates, whatever it has to be. I want the ups and the downs. I want all the feelings. I want the whole emotional ride. And I do want to have my heart broken. And I do want to have a moment. And they talk about this in that writing book, Save the Cat, where all is lost. He calls it the dark moment of the soul, I think. I want this moment where everything feels like it's lost, because that moment when your heart is broken cracks it open. And then when you finally get to that joyful ending, you can feel it in a way that you never would have felt it if you hadn't been cracked open in that way. So I do feel like that's really important too. And some stories nail the happy parts and the fun parts, but never do the darker, harder stuff. Some stories, take you to a dark place and never get you to the good stuff. And I want a story that's doing both of those things. I want them working on both of those levels. So when you ask what makes a great rom-com, for me, that's it. I want to laugh, but I also really, really want to cry too.
That was the answer that I didn't know I needed. To make them
so beautifully said.
Because the book that I queried my agent with was very heavy, and that's what I thought I wanted to write, and just packed full of dread and heaviness and all these things. And then the books that I signed my contract with Tyndall with were happy books, and I was like, I don't know if I know how to write a happy book. And somebody recommended, that's about the time that the rom-commers, I got your arc, and somebody was like, if you haven't read Katherine Center, read her books. And the rom-commers was my first book. And I've devoured every one of your backlists since then because I'm obsessed. I'm reading The Bodyguard right now, and I was telling Stephanie before we got on, I said, I think reading her books has made me a better writer and has helped me kind of find my lane. And somebody was like, just read Katherine Center and come back to me when you're done reading Katherine Center. Because I was crying to my friends, well, I'm not funny. What if I can't write a rom-com? And for so long, I had this internal struggle of rom-coms aren't real books.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's awful to say because there's so many amazing rom-com writers out there, but I just had drilled in my head, and I've never enjoyed watching rom-coms. My sister devoured them. She was the 10 Things I Hate About You girl. She just scooped them all up, but I was never that person. I was that heavy historical fiction and heavy women's fiction, even as a teenager. And so when I signed to write 2 rom-coms, I was like, I've never even read a rom-com. But someone said, read Katherine Center and then come back and tell me how you feel when you finish one of her rom-coms. And I was like,
yeah. And you make us feel it all.
Changed my heart and perspective. And then listening to a few podcasts you've been on and reading your author's note in the back of Hello Strangers, I was like, this is who I want to be when I grow up. I found it.
I feel like
I'm so glad to hear that, because that is the permission that I'm kind of wishing that I could give everybody, because I just feel like, darkness is important, but joy is also important, right? Light is also just as important, maybe even more so, right?
Yeah.
Because the darkness forces you to contend with it. You have to deal with the problems in your life, right? But it's so easy to ignore joy, right? And that's the thing that we all, like, if we want to kind of live our best lives, that is the thing that we need to know how to do. And we need to know how to help others do, right? We need to lift ourselves up and lift other people up too. So I feel like we all, like a lot of us who love to read as kids, wanted to take it seriously, thought that writing needed to be serious, absorbed a lot of messages about literary fiction versus other kinds of fiction. And, I would love to just give everybody permission to read, to follow your own compass about the stories that are resonating for you. And if that's dark historical stuff, great. If it's wizards, great. Whatever.
Right.
Early all the way. I am hooked.
Like, to give yourself permission to just whatever it is that it's speaking to in your own heart. If you're reading from the heart, it's like resonating with questions in your life that you may not even know that you're asking, and that you can't even articulate. It's going deep, right? And to give yourself permission, for whatever reason, this is what I want to read right now, and to just let that be valid and let that matter. Those books are going to guide you towards all kinds of answers in your life that you didn't even know you needed. So yes, I want to just give us all permission to read what we want to read, and let go of some of our attitudes that our English teachers may have handed to us.
I can attest.
I know. I'm so glad you wrote that author's note, because I remember finishing Hello Stranger and then reading it, and I was like, I'm such a fan of your writing, and I felt like it gave us so much of you and your heart behind your stories. I was like, this is it. About a year ago, I shared something about my favorite author's notes of all time, because I really live for an author's note, and yours was just right there, along with It Ends With Us, Colleen Hoover's author's note in that book, I think, is part of what makes that book such a moment. And then a book called The Yellow Wife, that is a phenomenal, really heavy novel, and her author's note. But I love that you did that for us, and I think people are still talking about it, and I think you are a real force in giving all of us that permission. And this leads really perfectly into our next question, which is that you handle the balance so deftly and so beautifully. And you handle these really heavy topics head on. I mean, you have cancer and traumatic brain injury in the rom-commers. You have face blindness in Hello Stranger, paralysis and How to Walk Away. I'm amazed by how you balance it all. And I'm also curious what your research, when a book requires more of it, what that looks like for you. Do you spend a certain period of time dedicated to really diving in and understanding? Are you kind of writing and researching as you go? How do you learn about something like face blindness and then write such a knockout rom-com about it?
Well, thank you. Yes, I do a ton of research, and I find that the research helps create the story, right? Because once you find out what it's like and what would happen, then you can see the story much better than you ever could if you were just way on the outside. So yeah, I mean, I would say that in the life cycle, I mean, I tend to write a book a year, and I'm researching in the fall, and I'm reading everything I can get my hands on. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm calling people. I'm interviewing people. I'm meeting with people. Some books require more of that than others do. The rom-comers required a little bit less, but I still did do a lot of it because I know how inspiring it is to do research. So I was looking for ways to do research. And then usually sometime around November, I really start writing, and I try to have like act 1 sort of before Christmas. And then starting in January, I try to finish up act 2 and act 3, and then I turn it in May. So, but I don't start writing until I've finished researching, and I don't research still when I'm writing, except for little things like, tiny little stuff, little ideas. But the big portion of like figuring out like what is this thing and how's it going to impact this person's life, I get that all done early on so that I can conceptualize what the story would be. How do I do it? I never ever think of, like, I always start with the people. I'm never thinking of the categories. You know what I mean? So always like, here's a person who has to face this thing, or here's a person who has to grapple with this thing, or here's a person who's like impacted by this thing. So it's never the category of person, it's the person dealing with the thing. And so I learn everything I can about the thing, and then that helps me figure out who the person is and how they're reacting to the thing. And so yeah, like How to Walk Away is the book that I probably did the most research for. And it's about a woman who's in a plane crash on the day she gets engaged, and she gets a 3rd-degree burns and a spinal cord injury. And she spends most of the book in the hospital, like doing rehab, trying to figure out how to walk again. Right. It's she's in a real situation. That said, it's funny.
Believe it or not, it's magical what you did with that book. I'm actually getting a little misty just remembering that book. Did you spend a lot of time with a physical therapist? Like, you nailed that. I can like transport myself back right now to that story.
Oh, thank you. I did everything I could think of. I went to rehab facilities. I went to ICUs. I interviewed spinal cord surgeons. I interviewed plastic surgeons with burn stuff. I went flying in a plane. I was very scared to fly at the time. And I got this random man, very nice gentleman who lived down the street from my mom, to take me flying in his little Cessna. And we to Galveston Island and then back. And then when we finally landed, I was like, okay, thank you. I'm so glad we survived. I need you now to tell me how to crash that plane. And like got the model in the hangar and showed me exactly how he thought a plane like that would go down. So yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of darkness in that story, right? She is dealing with some very big things. It's really intense. And yet there is also a very, very funny love story, because she falls madly in love with her physical therapist. And that is not a spoiler. That is just something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And, you've got all this hardship on the one side, and you've got all of this struggle and all of this. Basically, her life has fallen apart, and she has to figure out how to put it back together in a new way. So there's a lot of wisdom that comes out of that journey. But then on the other half of it is this sort of growing, playful, happy, blissful attraction that's going between her and this grumpy Scottish physical therapist named Ian.
So, don't you love a grumpy man?
And it's hard. It was hard to figure out how to find that balance. And I was nervous about it, because it was the darkest story I had kind of written up to date. And I talked to my editor about it, and I was like, I'm afraid that the darkness is going to subsume the light. And she said, if you do it right, the darkness will define the light. That was kind of my guiding idea as I moved through. It is both, it is both. And I think that life is both. And honestly, I feel pretty strongly that comedy exists because of tragedy. Like, it does not seem to me like it has to be one or the other in life, that you can write tragedies over here and comedies over here. For me, in my own actual life, they live shoulder to shoulder. We use comedy in my house as a coping mechanism when things are hard and dark. That is, we lean on the most to do it all.
That was one of the things that my husband and I argued the most about when we first got married, was that I was coming out of a really heavy season of grief, and he was one of those that was like, sweep it under the rug and make a joke about it. Let's go. Like, come on. And I'm like, I'm not joking over here. So I love that you said that, because that's our house now, because I've come so far. I've grown so much. So now we joke.
It's both, right? Like you have to acknowledge it and honor it and process it, but you also need to be able to lift yourself up out of it. And I think that's what comedy is for. Like squirrels don't need comedy because they don't know they're going to get run over, but we know exactly how hard life is, right? We know exactly how much suffering we're all going to have to do. Comedy is a really important way of coping with it all. So yeah, so books that are funny and sad make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
But when I first started writing, there was no place for that. There were comedies and there were tragedies, and I was in this weird limbo space in between.
Yeah.
It's a hard space to be in too, just because there are so many great rom-coms being put out there, but there are so many great, like heavy, or like you've got Kristen Hanna with the women and books like that. And for so long I looked at those kind of books and I was like, that's a book. That is a real book right there. And then I'd be like, oh, but I want to feel good, so I'm going to go pick up a lighter book. And learning the I think that's the lesson that I've learned over the last year, is learning the importance that both have their place. And they can also mix and mingle, like in your books, and handled correctly. But I also have to say that as someone that is trying to do that, it is harder than it looks, and you are the queen. You are the reigning queen of it.
You really are. And I love that the book that made you feel a little bit of that, oh, it has more darkness than ever before, was your first New York Times bestseller, and a pivotal moment, and so much growth and goodness to come for you. How amazing. And what a wise nugget.
Your debut.
Not her first book, folks, but one of the ones that, I mean, I'm curious, when that book became a New York Times bestseller and it was your 6th book, you said, did people then go back and find your backlist? And was that exciting to be like, oh my goodness, I've written all these books and now they're kind of being discovered for the first time?
Yes, that is still happening, actually. Because, How to Walk Away definitely sort of put my stuff on the map in a new way, and people found me through that. Just New York Times list was huge. But also The Bodyguard, came out in 2022, and it's been one of those books that just like, I don't know, it's just selling like hotcakes still to this day.
I love it. It's so good.
It is.
And it's connected to the rom-commers, by the way.
Yes.
So that's another book that has like really helped people sort of find me. And then when they read that book, they're like, oh my God, this woman has 11 other books. And then they go back to me, which I am so grateful for, right? When I first started writing, the books would come out and there'd be a week or two of like, yay. And then they would just disappear, right? And the reviews would fall off, everything would fall off. I think the default setting for books, honestly, is to disappear under the waves and never. And, for example, I wrote this book called Happiness for Beginners in 2015. It was the last book I wrote before hitting the New York Times list. I loved that book like crazy. And I was so excited about it. And I just wanted everybody in America to read this book. I was like, guys, this book. And then, it came out. Some people read it. My mother read it, it was fine. But it did not like take over the world in the way that I wanted it to, hoped that it would. And then many, many years later, in 2023, it got turned into a movie for Netflix. And that brought this whole new audience of people back to reading this book. So that book was like, I don't want to call it dead in the water. That's harsh. But it was, its moment in time was floating. And then it kind of got this sort of second shot at finding the people who would love it. And then there's all these people who came and read it and they were like, this is my favorite book. I can't even believe this book. Yeah, we missed it the first time, but we're back. We're back. I mean, it's incredibly gratifying.
Yeah.
I would love to know how, I think all of us would, just as authors. I think the New York Times list is like the goal for so many traditional authors. And then also I know we talked to Bethany Turner the other day, and she was like, that is not really on my radar. I want a movie. Like, she was just real point blank. Like, this is what I want. These are my goals. And so I think both of those, though, kind of go hand in hand for an author's ultimate dreams as far as writing. So I would love to know how you felt when both those things happened, but also how did your life change? Did your life change? Is anything different? Or are you still just rocking and rolling day by day?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think what you really honestly want as a writer is anything that helps people find you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything that helps you sort of stand out in some way, because it's such an incredibly crowded world,
Yes.
of books. There's more books out there than anybody ever would have time to read. And so how do you stand out and get people to pick your book over the 50,000 other books that they could be picking? And yeah, getting on lists helps a lot. The New York Times list really does help. Getting a movie obviously is very helpful. But also things like some beautiful, fantastic TikToker talking about your book, or some books, like loving your book and putting out something that encourages people to go check it out. Because really, and I so get it, and I'm the same way, books are a risk. Like if you see a cute pair of earrings in a store and you buy them, you're going to like those earrings. You've seen them, you know what they are, right? With a book, you really don't know. You don't know if you're going to like it until after you get home and a week later you read it, or 6 months later you read it. So it's a risk, and it's less of a risk with an author you've read before and loved, but with an author you've never heard of, it's a huge risk. You're shelling out $15 or $20 or $29 for this book, and you have no idea if you're going to like it. So I understand why it's hard for people to take a risk on a new person, and why it's hard to get yourself established. And I've been doing this for 15 years, and I have really had to double down on patience and gratitude of like, I'm just going to keep writing the best books I can possibly write, and I'm going to be grateful for every single good person who comes along and finds them and likes them and gets them. So it does feel really, really good when the world finally starts to notice, your stuff. And I feel that in lots of different ways. I mean, I definitely, yeah, I mean, when you hit the New York Times list, it is a great feeling, and you're published and also, that said, when it happens for me, it frequently happens, and I'm on book tour and I'm by myself in a hotel room. like this year, I found out. So the ROMCOMers hit the New York Times bestseller list, and it was number 10, which is the highest. It's kind of a ranked list, and this was the highest that I had ever been before. And I was in Huntsville, Alabama when this happened. And it was great. And I had, I found out in the hotel room, I had just checked in and changed, and I was on my way to go do this fantastic event with this cute bookstore called Snail on the Wall. But I hadn't eaten anything, and I knew that I was going to get back to the hotel really late. So I was driving along on the way to this venue, looking for like somewhere to get some food for later, because I wasn't going to eat it. You find something I can just put in the car and eat in the hotel room, because it's gonna be too late for room service. And so I went to some grocery store, and I was like, all right, I just hit the New York Times list. What's it gonna be? And I
grocery store in Alabama can't get better than that.
Cupcakes, all this totally naughty, insane non-food. And then I just took a picture and sent it to my family. I was like, celebrating the New York Times list. Cookies and peanut butter bars. Anyway, so it is a great thing. It is a great thing. It's glorious. And then also, of course, you're not writing for awards or accolades. Really, honestly, truly, it's this moment in time of bliss and excitement. And it does help you sell your next books. And so those are good things. But then, of course, right after that happens, you kind of shift back into your regular life, and you kind of, settle back into your and what you're doing here, and why you're writing books at all, which is something you have to kind of hold with you all the time. And sort of safe port in the storm.
Yeah, I love hearing that you kind of have this structure, looking at the year that works for you. Like, you research in the fall, then you draft, turn in by May. In the summer, well, you have book tour. When did ROMCOMers come out? What month? Was it June?
June. Yeah, June.
Yeah, so you have book tour. Do you get a little bit of summertime to just breathe and relax? What does summer look like for you? Are you just not taking a break at all?
Summer is total madness. Summer is insanity. I did a 3-week book tour for the ROMCOMers. That was every single night there was something. and it was a different city every day. And I love going on book tour. Like, not all authors are the same. You know, we all have different levels of introversion, but I personally love getting up on a stage. I love to I love getting to meet readers and get hugs. I'm a big hugger. And I love the signing lines. I love seeing people. I love signing things. I love getting out there. I mean, I also am perfectly happy to stay home in my pajamas. So I'm a combo. Yeah. But I do love going on book tour. And I'm always advocating for more. I'm like, send me for 4 weeks. I'll go for 6 weeks. I love it. Yeah. And now my kids are older. My youngest one is heading off to college. So I'm going to have it a little easier. But summer is bonkers. It's just all about just celebrating the new book, getting out there, extroverting as much as humanly possible. And then sometimes, like this particular summer, at the same time that I'm doing that, I also have my next year book is due. And so, I love, in an ideal world, I would have next year's book completely done before I start all of like book season, which is how I think of as summer. But this broke her leg, and it was a huge, crazy situation where she had to have emergency surgery, and I had to stay with her for a week in a motel in college because she couldn't get back into her. There were too many steps, and it was just like a whole thing. So I wound up having to turn in my next year book a little bit later because I just had to get through the process. And so now I'm doing both at the same time, which is fine, but it's like you're definitely like toggling back and forth between there and like
right.
Yes. I would love to know if since you are further into this, Stephanie and I are just getting started. I just finished my first official draft, and I went 2 days where I was like, I'm not going to look at it. It's in review right now. I was like, I'm not going to touch it. But I had 2 days where I was just like, what did I do with myself? And then I was like, I'm going to start writing another book. My husband was like, you need to just rest. You're fixing to be like a mad woman once this actually, you actually do turn it in and things start rolling. You're going to be insane. And I was like, no, my brain can't do it. I can't. I'm sorry. So I would love to know if you ever have those seasons or if you're just rocking and rolling pretty steady.
No, I actually believe very strongly in the importance of downtime. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. There are a lot of writing books and a lot of writers who will be like, it's a job, butt in the chair. You got to sit down and just do it every day. I do not write every day. I write in bursts. I have like 4 or 5 days when I leave town, and especially this got started when I had little kids, and I do not concentrate with children in the house.
That's me. That's the season I'm in right now. My mom, the last 2 weeks when I was really trying to get done, my mom was like, leave the house. Like my mom lives next door and helps a lot. And so she was like, go away. Like you cannot be in the house with them. You cannot lock yourself in a bedroom. That won't work. Leave the premises.
That's correct. You're always right. And she is right about that. So I'll go down to Galveston Island for like 4 or 5 days, and I'll do a big burst of writing. And if I'm not interrupted, I can get so much done. I can just get this kind of momentum, So I wake up in the morning, make a pot of coffee, sit down on the sofa with my laptop, start writing. Next thing I know, it's black outside, and it's so that is the way that I do it. And then I come back, and for like 3 weeks, I don't really think about the story. Like, I just let it drain. I just give myself time off from it. And then when I come back to it, I've got a fresh perspective. I reread everything that I just did. I mark all over it. I make changes. And then I kind of push forward and do the next section. But I think that downtime is really essential. I mean, it started out as I have to go home and take care of my children. Like that was my reasoning. I used to think that if I could just have, 2 solid months, I would just write the whole thing. And but I've really decided that having that time off to let it settle before going back to doing the next section is really crucial for me. And when I am in a time, and sometimes it happens when I just have a deadline and I've got to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, the quality of the writing goes down. I'm trying too hard. I think a really good story is not something that you can force. I think it has to to you like a little butterfly, like a really good story writes itself, right? It has to write itself. And so all you can do is just create the conditions where that sort of magic comes to you and be ready to write it down when it shows up. But if you're just constantly like driving like a bulldozer, trying to get through it, it's not that you can't do it. You can get some words on a page, but for me, those words are never as good as they would be if I had given a little grace, right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
So beautiful. I'm going to think of that butterfly. Well, for our last little segment with you, we would love to talk a little bit about your origin story as an author and your first moment and journey to publication. What did that look like for you? Did you query? Did you know people? Take us back.
So I will just pause and say that I wrote my very first novel that is not published and God willing, never will be. I was 12 in the 6th grade, and this is in the 1980s, and it was fan fiction about the 1980s boy band Duran Duran. So I basically invented fan fiction. And, I was very awkward, very miserable in the 6th grade, and I had 2 best friends who were also awkward and also miserable, and we got this idea that we should write novels about meeting the band members, and we should cast ourselves as the main characters in the novel.
Yes, why not? I think we need to circle back to this idea.
Oh my God. The worst novel ever written. My has explicit instructions. I still have it in a storage tub in our attic, but my sister, I'm like, look, if I am hit by a bus, do not go to the funeral. There is no time for grieving. You need to go to the attic, find that novel, and burn it before it ever sees light. But it was also genius, right? Like it was also such a brilliant thing to do because we rescued ourselves with that story. We were so hard on ourselves at that age. We were so mean to ourselves all the time. And all 3 of us just needed some hope and some joy and some feeling that there was a chance that life was going to get better. And that's what those stories did for us. I mean, we knew it was fiction. We weren't crazy. We didn't really think that all the band members of Duran Duran had fallen in love with us. But in that way, that fiction, it's not real, but you believe it anyway. We believed it in some really essential way, and it lifted us up. And honestly, I am not still writing about Duran Duran. But on some very basic level, I am still writing the same kind of story. I'm still writing stories that are meant to lift myself and everybody else up, to laugh, to make us feel better, to give us some hope. I mean, it's the same basic idea, even all these years later. So that was when I was a kid. My first, and then from then on, like I drank this sort of sweet nectar, and I knew that I wanted to be a writer from the age of 12. Honestly, clearly, I wasn't always sure it was going to work out. Deciding you want to be a writer is kind of like deciding you want to win the lottery. So, it's not an easy thing to make happen, but I did all the things that you do. I wrote journals, I wrote poetry, I memorized things, I read all the time. I studied song lyrics, I obsessed over movies and stories and structure and all those things my whole growing up. And then I went to Vassar College and I majored in English and creative writing. And I wrote a creative thesis for my thesis and won the Vassar College Fiction Prize, which I was very proud of. I also that same week kissed a cute boy from my art class at a bonfire. And then after graduation, I drove home with my mom and we spent the whole drive from New York to Texas debating which was the greater accomplishment. It was
so fantastic.
Then I went on to grad school and got a master's in fiction writing right out of college. And then I spent the next decade sending short stories to the New Yorker and getting rejected. Like I had a lot of early encouragement, a lot of early success. And then I had like a full decade of humiliation and rejection and despair. And I'm from Houston. We have 1 million cousins and relatives in this town, and everybody just felt so sorry for me. I was the tragic ne'er-do-well of the family. I'm the middle child of 3 girls. Both my sisters were functioning members of society, and I was the person who would come up to me at holiday parties and be like, "Oh, still." So, and I just couldn't get published, and it was really depressing. And I kept thinking I should quit. I kept trying to quit, and then I would decide definitively, like, I'm done. I'm out. This is masochistic. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm finished. And then like 2 weeks later, I'd get another idea for a story and I would just start up again. And it felt like this very tragic affliction that I had. And then when I was 32, I had just had a baby. I'd been kind of overwhelmed by life. I'd never been able to quit writing until I had that baby. And then I didn't write for like a year and a half after she was born because I was just I'm not a multitasker. I was totally overwhelmed by everything about it. And one night my older sister dared me to write a novel. And, you know, I had written all these short stories. I'd done all this training. I'd spent my whole life, but I had never tried to write a novel before. And I was very intimidated by this idea. So, I mean, she dared me and I took the dare, right? She was like, you should write a novel about being a mom. She was like, you should just write a funny novel about being a mom. And then she was like, how hard can that be? And of course, all the time before I had gone to grad school, I'd gone to master. I was trying to write very literary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And with that dare, I gave myself permission to just write something light and funny. And so I opened up a document like the very next day. I had an idea for what that novel should be. I opened up a document. I put it into Courier font, you know, which is like the of all the fonts. I made the margins like 2 inches on every side because I was so nervous about how do you even write something that's 300 pages long. But I didn't even need to be worried about it at all because the minute that I started writing, it turns out that funny novels were the thing that I was meant to do all along. And the minute I started writing, it was immediately the most fun I'd ever had in my life. And it wrote itself. I wrote that whole first draft in 6 weeks, which is the fastest I've ever written anything to date. But it just came sort of pouring out. And, you know, I mean, it's a very long story. We could go all night, but long story short, I wound up finding by accident through a neighbor, a kind of fairy godmother like agent who offered to represent me. And she sent it off. This was like a year and a half later. I had sort of polished it all up and put it back in Times New Roman, which is the correct font. And she sent it off to 8 different publishing houses, and there were 4 that were interested. And she got them into an auction and then into a bidding war. And then I wound up getting a 2-book hardcover deal with Random House, and I did 4 books with them. And you know, that's like the happy ending, but it was also just the beginning too, because then as soon as you're publishing books, then you have to like talk people into reading them, which is like a whole different level of you know, trauma, because you just like nobody wants to read your book. This is the thing that they don't tell you about when you're like Mary Tyler Moore throwing up your hat and thinking like, you know, my life is going to be great. I'm going to write a book. And then you write a book and then you have to like talk people into reading it. So that once I published that first book in 2007, I have now spent the next, I don't know, whatever the math is, 15 years, slowly trying to, you know, encourage people to read them and try them. And hopefully they like them. And then hopefully they come back for more. But that's been a whole other journey. So I've really been, I mean, honestly, I will say in summary, I've been kind of like the opposite of an overnight sensation. But I really, in the end, and I've thought about this a lot lately, I really think that was the better way to go, because it gave me a lot of time to figure out what my purpose is. I am writing these stories, you know, what I'm here for. It gave me time to get better. And by get better, I mean, it gave me time to figure out my own compass as a reader and as a writer of what I really love in stories, and then sort of get stronger and stronger at doing that for other people. It allowed me to learn a whole lot about gratitude and not giving up, you know, and how to just double down on the blessings in your life and to not be mad when somebody else gets something that you thought you ought to have, like a lot of equilibrium about how to just be cool with life and take the long view and be grateful for the good things that come along. So it's been, I mean, I think that it has taught me a lot about writing, but it has also taught me a lot about how to be a person, like a good person in the world. And I talked to a bookseller last year on book tour who was telling me that she can really tell the difference between writers who have had it easy and writers who have not. And she said writers who have not had it easy are so grateful for everything, and they're so glad there. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. Like I am just, I mean, the first book tour that I ever went on in 2009, when no one had ever heard of me, half of the stops had 0 people at them. And this year, you know, I went to Indiana and I went to Austin and I went to St. Louis, and I would walk into these crowds full of, you know, 450 people. So excited to be there. And I would just tear up looking out, because I was like, I know exactly what this means, you know? So I'm grateful for it all. I'm so glad to be here. It's such a joy. And, yeah, it's been a long, good road with many opportunities for personal growth.
It's amazing. Are you still with that same fairy godmother agent all these years later?
Wow. Yeah, I am. I'm not still with the same publisher. But yeah, my agent has been with me this whole time, and we're buddies at this point. We've seen each other through various babies and all kinds of things. I left Random House after 4 books, and I went to St. Martin's Press, which is part of Macmillan. And I hope I'll stay there forever, because they've been so good to me, and they're just the best. They're the literal greatest. So yeah, it's good.
That's amazing. I still think you need to circle back to the boy band.
Duran. I mean, fans would eat it up.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was struggling with making the transition from like hardcore women's fiction to writing rom-coms, my husband reminded me that when I was in 6th grade, the moment I decided I wanted to write for the rest of my life was we had to take an inanimate object and write a story about it, and from the perspective of the inanimate object. And all the, I had girls in my class that danced and they picked their ballet shoes, and boys picking their baseball glove and all these things. And here I am over here like, I'm going to write about a toothpick. And how sad the toothpick would be to get picked out of the box and put in someone's mouth. And so my husband reminds me of that often. He's like, you wrote a whole novel about a toothpick from the perspective of a toothpick. I think you can do this.
I think you can do it.
I like it. That sounds like a hero's journey to me. I'm in.
I know.
Yes.
And those years of struggle just make you the writer that you are today. I mean, there's nothing worse than like year after year when the writing isn't going well, facing a holiday season. To face every family member at every function. How's it going? And then they don't really know if they should ask about it, or like, it's just so uncomfortable. And that's just all of it. The rejection. I wrote down that you said a humiliation, rejection, and despair, because gosh, those words resonate with, I don't know, most writers, but it's just really inspiring too to see you have this success now at the point that you are at in your life with grown kids. I think, gosh, I'm going to turn 40 in a couple years, but so many people at 30, I see them asking on threads, I'm 30, I've never written a book, am I too late? I'm like, oh my gosh, girl, you're just getting started, and it's just incredible.
I also think the older you get, the more wisdom you have to put into those books.
Yeah.
So I really don't know that writing books is a 20-something person's game. Like writing books that are really meaningful. I mean, I think
it's true.
Not that they don't have their contributions, but I think there's a lot to be said for being older and wiser when you're writing novels. Really, you need that depth, and you're not going to have it when you're young. You might have the skills, but I'm sure we're going to hang up and I'm going to think of 50 novels written by 20-year-olds that I love.
No, but I know what you're saying. It's just that heft. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm 27. Yeah. It's okay.
Well, there's there's plenty of time. And,
I agree with you though. I agree. Because even just from writing the book that I queried with 2 years ago now, to my writing now, I'm like, I didn't know what I was doing then. Exactly. I agree with you 100%. I'm ready to see what my 30s produces.
Yeah, it's just amazing. It only
30s are better. There's lots to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, for a final fun question, are you reading anything fun this summer? Do you have time to read? What does the reading life look like for Katherine Center?
I do read a lot. but I don't tend to read when I'm writing.
Yeah.
I am frantically just rereading my own stuff, you know. So I try to just kind of keep that story sort of top of mind and not. That said, I do wind up reading all kinds of other people's things also, but I try to kind of stay focused on the story that I'm doing.
Yeah.
I just finished reading Emily Giffen's new book, The Summer Pact, because we
Oh,
just spent
Yes.
together in Dallas, and she sent me a beautiful copy, and I've been a fan of her for a long time, and I had met her once before, but I hadn't really hung out with her, and we got to hang out in Dallas, and I was very excited about it. So
Yes.
that was a super fun read, very complicated story about friendship and rediscovering friendship after many years. I'm totally in that place right now because my youngest one is about to go off to college, and I'm like, oh, friends, right? I need to work on that. Oh, I forgot about that. So it was very topical for me. I do read a lot of nonfiction when I am writing. And I love audiobooks that are nonfiction. And I'll have them kind of go in the background while I'm doing, just mom stuff and life stuff and cooking dinner and shopping and getting showers done and stuff. So I did just read. Oh my God, what did I just read? I forget
It happens. We understand.
It's a book about oh God, I wish I could remember the name of it. It's a sort of nonfiction book that is sort of science-based about how important it is for us all to pay attention to our five senses.
Ooh,
Right.
sounds.
It was super fascinating, and how like we create these mental maps of how the world is, but then we don't update them. And now I feel bad that I'm not mentioning the name of this person. So let me see if I can find it on my.
No, you can always send it to us later too, and we can link it.
It's called Better in Every Sense. That's what it's called.
Oh, good title.
And it's it's just one of those sort of nonfiction listens that kind of wakes you up to something that you probably should have known or remembered or thought about, but you just get busy with life and you stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
So, but it's all about, how like actually like being in your body and like paying attention to smells and tastes, and, the breeze going by can shift your perspective on all kinds of interior mental things going on in your head. And I thought it was a really interesting read. I heard about it on the podcast Hidden Brain, which I think is a really great podcast. It's like a social sciencey kind of podcast, and it's really fun to listen to. So highly recommend.
Thank you for the rec.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Well, Katherine, we cannot thank you enough. This has been such an incredible conversation. So generous of you with all of your insights. So much to think about. I can't wait to listen back and share this with our listeners. They're going to love it. Your Rom-Comers was our summer book club read. So we have a lot of listeners who've been reading it with us, and they're going to love all that we discussed about Emma and Charlie and just every bit of it. So thank you.
You guys are the best. Thank you so much for letting me come and hang out with you. And you're such great listeners. I feel like I really covered everything perhaps too thoroughly. Like we really got into it.
Never. It was so good. Amazing.
You're the best. Thank you.
Thank
of course.
You. So blessed to have you. I was texting some of my book friends this morning, and I was like, I'm about to interview Katherine sooner. I don't know what it is. Out there, like, because they all know I just love rom-comers and all your books that I've been able to just binge read since almost came out.
I know.
Thank you for chatting with us. We're so good. It was such a great conversation despite all of our technical difficulties.
Yeah, we pushed through. Look at us.
We did. We persevered. Well, thank you so much, Booked Solid Pod listeners. We will link up to Katherine's website and her Instagram, and we will also provide all of the book titles and podcast recommendations that we mentioned. And we will see you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.